Welcome to the BattleBlitz webinar series, The Data Platform, Democratizing Big Data and Analytics. My name is Bart Kellerman and I will be your host. You are participating in a live interactive webinar with nearly 200 registered attendees representing a broad set of international quantitative industry professionals. We will get started with our keynote, then move on to a panel discussion and end with an open Q&A session. Your private questions may be submitted in the online Q&A box anytime on your screen. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors who made this all possible. Beacon Platform is a premier enterprise innovation platform designed to supercharge developer productivity. Beacon partners with and empowers clients to become change agents in their organizations through cutting-edge technology tools. Beacon is developing the future of financial services on the cloud and provides clients with a powerful set of cross-asset trading and risk tools and analytics out of the box, including full access to source code, and lets them build on top. Thank you, Beacon Platform. The CME Group is the world's leading and most diverse derivatives marketplace. Thank you, CME Group. Bitvor provides an artificial intelligence-powered data analytics platform that integrates diverse sets of unstructured data to derive predictive insights about a company's sentiment, growth, ESG, and risk profile. Bitvor's insights help you identify alpha and more effectively manage risk with less time-consuming and costly manual effort. Up-to-the-minute data provides a virtual real-time analysis on a 24/7 basis. Thank you, Bitvor. Maiden Century's Idea Platform is a cloud-based platform that ingests, restructures, and connects all of your key data assets into a unified environment to generate real-time, actionable, and intuitive investment insights. Maiden Century also has a systematic product, which consists of a systematic feed of scores derived from your specific ensemble of alternative data assets to create high sharp, low correlation, differentiated inputs for quantitative portfolios. Thank you, Maiden Century. RepRisk is a pioneer in ESG data science that leverages the combination of artificial intelligence and machine learning with human intelligence to systematically analyze public information and identify material ESG risks. RepRisk ESG risk platform is the world's largest and most comprehensive due diligence database on ESG and business conduct risks. Thank you, RepRisk. Let's get started. Access to large data sets and the ability to overlay analytics has been the domain of large quantitative managers that have the financial and personal resources. The rapid evolution of the data marketplace combined with innovative technologies has spawned the data platform, which provides asset managers of any size access to the largest data sets with sophisticated analytics at a competitive price. Data platforms are offering analytics through machine learning, sentiment analysis, and artificial intelligence to analyze huge data lakes in clouds. Let's begin with our keynote, Ryo Shimizu. Ryo is the head of apps and partnerships at Beacon Platform. Ryo, thank you for keynoting this webinar. I know you must be busy after recently moving back to the US after having spent 14 years in the APAC region with Goldman Sachs and most recently with Beacon. Welcome. You have worked with data your entire life and have an interesting background. Could you please share with us how you arrived at your current thinking about data, how you view the current market landscape in the data world, and the evolution of the concept of what's been known as the data platform?
Thanks, Mark. So let me tell you a story as it relates to the topic of data and give you my perspective on how data platforms came to be. So throughout my professional life, I've been working with data and lots of it. In the earlier years, I was a grad student in the field of computational biology at Stanford University, where I was developing novel methods and techniques to identify single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, in DNA datasets. SNPs are basically single letter variations in the gene, and they're the most common type of genetic variations among people. It can serve as a genetic marker, and it can also be responsible for a particular population's propensity for certain genetic disorders or susceptibility for a type of disease. And so you can imagine there's been a lot of money and research that's gone into this area. So this all sounds cool, but conceptually speaking, searching for these single letter differences in long strands of DNA is the same thing as the proverbial needle in a haystack problem. And so the goal was to come up with analytics and algorithms to improve the signal versus noise ratio for finding these. Fast forward a couple of years after having sold my soul to the financial services industry, I'm at Goldman Sachs working as a quant on the electronic trading desk, doing things like market microstructure research, impact analysis, looking for traces of execution algos within intraday tick data, researching ways to hide our algo footprint so it can't be picked off by other trading algos. On the surface, this might sound like a 180-degree pivot in terms of career, but it was quite natural for me because fundamentally I was doing the same thing. You have this large data set, your goal is to extract value from it, and you design sophisticated algorithms and analytics as a means to achieve that goal. In the first scenario, the data set was the vast amount of DNA sequence data on the human genome. In the latter, it was the vast amount of intraday tick data sets and franchise flow data. The common denominator here is that I was using big data and doing data science type stuff before the marketing term was coined. What I mostly took for granted back then, however, was the infrastructure made available to me and the platform engineering that enabled these kinds of research. In the case with the DNA stuff, I had the Stanford supercompute cluster at my disposal. And in the case of the market microstructure research, I had access to a multi-million-dollar on-prem data warehouse. And all of that market data connectivity, ETL pipelines worked out for me, and with a huge data engineering and data ops team maintaining and supporting that setup. And so I had the luxury of focusing on just the so-called value-added parts of this data analytics value chain. It was only later in my career when I embarked on building a new business unit, when I really started to appreciate the platform engineering machinery that went into setting all of this up, as well as how much all of this costs. And I mentioned that I was doing data science even before the term was coined. I don't mean to come off as a know-it-all here. In fact, most of the theory and concepts behind modern day AI hasn't really changed since Professor John McCarthy first coined the term artificial intelligence back in 1955. The point I'm trying to make is that large financial institutions with deep pockets were already doing the kinds of research that's now popularized in marketing materials. So if you move on to the next slide, what changed? What changed is computer technology, right? I know it's a bit of a cliche, but computer technology has advanced to the point where these big data and data science type research are no longer reserved for the deep pocketed institutions. And when I say computer tech, I specifically mean advances in compute, storage, and bandwidth. And to give you a better sense, I've summarized this in terms of dollar amounts. Computational power per dollar measured in floating point operations per second, or flops per dollar, increased by a factor of 10 roughly every 4 years over the last 25 years. And with cloud computing, you literally have access to teraflops compute for pennies. Then there's storage. In 1960, the cost of storing 1 gigabyte was $2 million. In 1980, that same amount could be had for $40,000. Fast forward to 2018, a 3 terabyte hard disk or 3,000 gigabyte of space can be had for under $50. And here again, cloud service providers offer storage for pennies per gigabyte now. Then you have bandwidth. You might think of this as networking speeds. Back in 2008, a megabit of bandwidth would have cost you $9. 10 years later, the same amount of bandwidth costs you 76 cents. And the decrease in cost is proportionate to the increase in available bandwidth. Personally, I think it's the advance in bandwidth that's been a game changer for many companies. It's what enabled companies like Netflix, for example, to go from mailing DVDs to streaming videos over the internet. And it's also what really made cloud computing a viable option for many businesses. If you fast forward 20 years from the dot-com era, and you got this sort of renaissance in the name of fintech. You have all these big financial services companies talking about their cloud strategy or their data strategy, because they all understand at a fundamental level, if they don't embrace this mega trend, they too may become extinct. And so you have this symbiotic relationship forming between the traditional financial services company and the fintechs of the world. The incumbents are either partnering with or providing funding for these promising newcomers in hopes of staying ahead of the curve, which in turn is accelerating the pace of innovation in the space. And so you got this democratization going on in several layers. Cloud computing is the new norm. Access to large-scale compute, storage, and bandwidth is no longer reserved for the deep-pocketed institutions. AI and ML frameworks developed at universities and tech companies around the world have been open sourced and made available in mass. And this has, in many ways, leveled the playing field for lots of participants in the financial market. Also, with the emergence of the data marketplace, the end consumers of data can now decide what data set is important for them and what kinds of data they want to work with without having to rely on their IT departments to intermediate that access for them. But this unprecedented access to compute, data, and toolkits also has its drawbacks. You have this flood of data being generated from both external as well as internal sources. You have these cloud-native data warehouses becoming massively parallel, and you got literally terabytes of data bursting through the pipes. Also, you have all these frameworks and toolkits like Spark, NoSQL, GraphML, TensorFlow, Keras, SciPy, PyTorch, that's springing up everywhere with new startups forming around it. And it's becoming harder and harder for enterprises to make use of these tools in a coherent way. And so now we're seeing these so-called data platforms emerging to address this issue. And that brings us to today.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great overview, and you can see how it's grown and how sophisticated it's become. It almost necessitates a platform. That was it's a good overview. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I'm going to circle back to you, Rio, during the panel discussion, and we'll find out a little bit more about what you said on that one slide in terms of your work with the CME Group and how that transpires. But in the meantime, let's move on to the panel discussion. And if you have, once again, let me remind everybody, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box on your screen. So I will be the moderator, and we will now hear from our highly respected panelists. I will ask each panelist a question on their perspective regarding the whole data platform concept, and after subject matter, after which we will then open the discussion, and we'll take your questions as well. Toby Webb is the Senior Strategic Advisor at Bitvor. He's going to be our first panelist. Prior to coming on board Bitvor, you were the head of EMEA sales for the Information Services Division at the London Stock Exchange. Very interesting, because the London Stock Exchange recently bought a very large data company. We all know that. Toby, instead of relying on various data providers, however, your platform pulls data from the market through your own resources and creates a 360-degree view of a company's profile. Could you take us through that process, how it works, and maybe even give us an example of somebody you've worked with?
Yeah, good morning. Sorry, good day, everyone. Yeah, I mean, basically, our platform allows for a view of a company from the perspective of unstructured data. So Bitvor, we're an intelligence company headquartered in California, and we provide insights from the world of unstructured data, such as news, press releases, earnings transcripts, patents, filings, regulatory updates and this data comes from over 60,000 sources of public and private data. And currently we process up to 6 million pieces of content daily. And many of the world's leading asset managers, banks, rating agencies, insurance companies have become our clients over the last 10 years. And really what we have developed and continue to enhance is an industrial AI processes for the extraction, tagging, and then the onward delivery of relevant risk, growth, sentiment, ESG insights, and scoring from around about 300 different topics for over 400,000 global entities. So, our insights are available through APIs, data feeds, and apps that power various business applications, risk platforms, portfolio monitoring, process workflows, predictive analysis, and then really interestingly, proactive alerting. And an example of the kind of analysis that we have is on the next slide. So here we've got an example of a company called Activision, and the news that was that was available here. Once our clients were able to drill down to the specific news to better understand what was driving, our negative sentiment score around health and safety topics. And here you can see the latest string of bad news from Activision revolving around workplace harassment, sexism, controversy, bad PR, and tone deaf responses, and subsequently employee walkouts. And in this case, that actually happened to have a pretty impactful effect on their stock price. So hopefully that gives you sort of a good understanding of kind of what we do.
Yeah, that's good. That's interesting, because you're not relying on data providers. You're going directly into the market, and that's an interesting dynamic. And we're going to circle back to you as well. Let's move on to our next panelist. Kesser Hassan is the CEO and founder of Maiden Century. Kesser, you were a portfolio manager at Point72, and through that experience, you designed your data platform, which in essence fulfilled the needs of a portfolio manager as you saw it. How is your platform different than what you found in the marketplace when you were running a fund? You obviously felt that there were some deficiencies and you could do a better job. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, happy to, Bart, and thanks for having me on this webinar as well. Look, I mean, I really started building the software stack that eventually became the basis of Maiden Century because I was so frustrated as a buy-sider by the disconnect between the promise and reality of working with data, particularly alternative data. I don't know if any investor who wakes up in the morning saying, I don't want to use data, I don't want to be better informed about my investments or learn about new companies that I could be investing in. But I think we have to acknowledge that there are genuine barriers that keep people from adopting data more widely as part of the investment process. For one thing, it's expensive. And I don't mean the cost of the data itself. It's all the additional costs that you incur and the brain cells you destroy in extracting meaning and insight out of the data. I estimate that for every $1 that gets spent on purchasing data, another $2 is being spent in building and managing the internal resources and infrastructure required to ingest, map, model, evaluate, visualize, interpret all of this data. It's massively expensive and inefficient. The second hurdle is what I call the Canon DSLR versus Apple iPhone problem. DSLR cameras are great. I mean, they promise amazing picture quality. I have one somewhere. It's sitting in a closet, I think. I haven't touched it in years. Why? Because it's heavy, it's complex, and now I have a phone in my pocket that can do 80 to 90% of the job in 1% of the time. And by the way, it keeps getting better every day with the help of better software and smarter algorithms. The fact is, most solutions in the marketplace are unnecessarily complex and over-engineered. And maybe this isn't a huge problem for your audience today, but I can tell you not everyone has a PhD in computer science or applied math, and not everyone has the time in their day to think through the dozens and dozens of hoops they have to jump through before they can even figure out if evaluating a certain data set was worth the exercise in the first place. And then a third hurdle that I faced is what I call the North and South Korea divide. Both of these countries have so much in common, right? They share a common border, common culture, common language, and yet they couldn't be more different. And I think the same thing is true for fundamental and quantitative investors. They both invest in the same securities, have the same goals, generate returns, and work with somewhat similar data. And yet they always seem to just speak past each other. The terminology, the approach, even the educational backgrounds of the people who work in these functions are also different, that they may as well be from different planets. And I wanted to change this. I think both sides can learn so much from the other. So I wanted to create tools that could help bridge that gap for both sides. So really, Maiden Century was created out of necessity and frustration. At its heart, we built an end-to-end software stack that can seamlessly integrate all of the different alternative data sources an investor uses, merge the data with other fundamental sources of information. We overlay all of this with a ton of smart algorithms and an intuitive UI layer. And ultimately, we deliver end products that people care about. For fundamental investors, real-time and accurate KPI forecasts across thousands of metrics for publicly listed companies. And for systematic investors, quantitative and fundamentally rooted rankings of all stocks covered by their data sources. In short, it finally allows you to put that Canon DSLR up for sale on eBay and reunite the Korean Peninsula.
I love those analogies. I think I have a Nikon camera with a couple of lenses sitting somewhere in my attic or a box somewhere,
Exactly.
and I need to get that sold. But very, very interesting analogies that you make, and the usefulness of a data platform here is really shines through. That was fascinating. Now let's go back to Rio, and and talk about what he's done for CME Group. Thanks again for that excellent keynote, by the way, Rio. You mentioned the complexity, and on the screen you showed that there were 4.8 million instruments that exist at the CME Group. Can you share with us how are you working with the CME Group and their large data set?
Yeah. So Beacon isn't a data platform per se, but it has all the building blocks for it to be one. And in fact, a lot of our customer use cases revolve around using Beacon as a data and analytics platform. And we really believe that companies do best when their employees are empowered to adapt and innovate quickly. And so we made a platform flexible enough to support these fast changing requirements, at the same time offer enterprise grade controls to mitigate the risks that come along with moving fast and breaking things, right? And we've taken the knowledge and best practices gained through decades of experience at some of the most successful financial institutions in the world and packaged that as a platform product that's installed onto your cloud provider of choice. And so you can think of Beacon as this cloud agnostic operating system that provides the application building blocks and the runtimes, enterprise grade controls and software development lifecycle workflows, as well as reference implementations of financial instruments you'd like to model to run risk and analytics on top of. What I think is quite unique to Beacon is that as a customer, you also get access to a lot of Beacon source code. So it's not just a black box system, but a transparent platform that you can leverage. It also comes with an integrated development environment, so you could build modules and apps on top to customize Beacon to your specific needs. And so we've seen customers take Beacon and build data science type workflows or turn it into AI toolkits. But we also recognize that not all customers have an in-house development team that can code up apps and analytics on top of Beacon. So we're opening up the platform to third-party app providers so that customers can, in the near future, get turnkey solutions on top. An example of that, we've been working with CME to create a data plugin, market data plugin that allows seamless access to query API from within Beacon's data fabric. And so the vision is that with CME and Beacon, you basically have a turnkey data platform solution ready to go on day one.
All right, well, that's great. I'm sure that's a big help to the CME Group to enable access to their data, and obviously you're a real change agent there, as per your original discussion of the Beacon platform. Let's move on to some questions that I have for all of our panelists, and we'll have sort of like, this is our official panel discussion. And I'd like all of you to answer this first question that I have. And we're getting some questions in now, which is interesting, but we'll address those in just a second. So question number one for everybody, is the cloud platform a natural, and it would seem to me, yes, but is the cloud platform a natural evolution of the data world? Toby, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the simple answer is yes. I think it's from a client's perspective, there's a massive re-engineering of a lot of businesses in the financial services arena where they're moving from legacy systems to the cloud, and just the digestion and ingestion of data is much easier now than it used to be through the cloud infrastructures.
Okay, Kesser.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly big fans of the cloud. Our entire infrastructure sits on AWS. Our clients can access all their data and insights via a browser from any device, any location. I think from an infrastructure perspective, the cloud also allows us to just quickly scale up our processes to stay ahead of the rapid growth we've seen in our own sort of data set partnerships and user base. So we're huge fans.
Yeah. Rio, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, historically, data lived inside of these on-prem data centers and data warehouses. And as these data migrated over to the cloud, you now have these analytics having to move over to the cloud as well. And that's why you're seeing these cloud platforms emerge.
Yeah, I think we all agree that it is a natural evolution. It makes things easier for people instead of a manager to pick and poke through all of the different data sources. To have a platform makes a heck of a lot of sense. And we've made some of the points there. The second question I have is currently the platform market is very fragmented. And there are a lot of people, this is very cutting edge technology that's coming to the fore. But what will it really take for a leader to emerge? And Kessler, you want to start with that one? What does it take to be a leader in this field?
Yeah, I'm happy to. But I mean, look, I think platforms mean very different things to different people. You've got three amazing organizations here that have built three really good platforms. And yet, I think all three of us address completely different problems in the marketplace. Maiden Century's particular focus is on integrating dozens and dozens of disparate data sets into a single interface for the benefit of frontline users. So analysts, portfolio managers, CIOs. I do think you'll probably see one or two industry standards emerge in this particular field because the data vendors don't want to be dealing with 30 different platforms. I certainly hope we'll be one of the few that emerges the industry standard in our particular domain, but I think there'll be leaders that emerge in a bunch of other sort of domains as well.
Toby, will Bitvor be one of those leaders?
Yeah, we certainly hope so. I think we have a specific type of data that we're delivering, and to Kessler's point, I think that the data needs of organisations is very diverse and full. So I think there will be, a place for the aggregators, and if their commercial models make sense for other data platforms to go into kind of aggregated type platforms, then I think you'll see growing adoption of those bigger platforms. But I think there always will be a need for people to find new and interesting sources of data for edge. So I think there will always be a place for other platforms. So that you're probably going to get, for core data, some of the bigger platforms will get growing some dominance, but I think it will still be proliferated.
Right, agree with that. Moving on, Rio, you do more than just supply a data platform. You actually build or provide the tools, the picks and shovels, if you will, for the building of a data platform. So maybe will Beacon be the builder of the future leader of the data platform world?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. In my view, any platform is only as successful as the ecosystem that it sustains. And I imagine the platform that's the most successful in building out the said ecosystem will emerge as that leader. And I think Beacon is well positioned to be that.
Yeah, I know Beacon has done very well recently. I think you're on your third round of funding, if I'm not mistaken. And you also have landed, even recently, some serious contracts.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so I've got another question for everyone, and that is, what are the most important characteristics that end users are looking for when committing to a specific data vendor's platform? I mean, we've come out with some of those. I mean, Kessler, you were very good about identifying some of the characteristics that people are looking for, the ease of use. They're not, these are not necessarily experienced programmers, developers that are trying to source and take advantage of the data sources that they're connecting to, and that's where you step in. Toby, what do you think are the most important characteristics with your unique mechanism for sourcing data, throwing it into an AI engine, and coming out with results? What are you seeing as the most important characteristics that your end users are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from our perspective, the key metric for us is that, our clients stay with us and our renewal rates are really strong, which is that, our renewal rates are in the high 90%. So we're obviously providing a good service and delivery to our existing client base. I think that, all said and done, at the end of the day with clients, it's about the quality of the data, whether they can find value of that data. The actual delivery mechanisms, you kind of can typically solve we're working closely with the different clients that you're delivering into their various systems, their various integrations, and the lens that the end user actually gets. So I think it's a lot about being flexible with your delivery mechanism and being able to listen to what your clients' needs are and adjusting accordingly. We produce huge amounts of different data, and sometimes clients don't need all of those data points, so you kind of have to configure it accordingly. So I think it's about being flexible, but net at the end of the day, the key driver for growth of your business is the quality of the data.
Okay, so flexibility and quality of data. Kesser, do you agree with that? And do you have any additional characteristics?
No, I think Toby's spot on. I mean, I'd say from our perspective, clients want reliability. They want a solution that's cost effective, easy to use, doesn't require significant changes to their current workflow. And I think most importantly, because we target front-end users, they want a solution that can help them generate profitable returns for their clients. It's very ROI focused.
Yeah. Yeah. Rio, what are you seeing? Again, you come more from the tools provision standpoint. Do you have any additional characteristics?
No, it's very in line with what Toby and Kesser mentioned. It's really about flexibility, extensibility, and robustness of the platform that people are looking for. So I agree with all of those statements.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question that just came through. What asset classes are the fastest growing within the financial services? What products, apps, and/or services will help new and existing customers adapt in these spaces? So I guess when you talk with your clients, where are you seeing the most opportunity within financial services? Tell us about existing and new customers, and what are they really asking for in terms of asset classes? Can you guys maybe Kesser, could you give us a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, our historic focus has been on the equities asset class. Increasingly, we're getting a lot of questions coming in from fixed income credit investors as well, and some from macro investors, because again, the type of data that we focus on, which is alternative data, arguably has insights on all of these asset classes and potentially even within the commodity space.
Okay. All right. Toby, what are you seeing? Where are you getting most of your business?
Yeah, I mean, the big focus on equity and fixed income and the whole kind of credit space. I think the thing that's most interesting at the moment is the emergence of around the need for information around ESG profiles of entities, corporates, etc. And that's almost a rabid demand for anything around the ESG space, net zero pledges. I mean, the flow of information around that is certainly something that a lot of clients are looking for, and downstream within their businesses, they see huge demand for the use of the data within their businesses and within their trading activity. So it's probably not really an asset class, it's more kind of a topic, I think, that's key at the moment.
So is it ESG in terms of to make sure that they're living within the guidelines of ESG, or is it to make sure that companies that they're working with are working within the guidelines of ESG? What aspect of ESG are you referring to?
Well, we tag the news and content that we produce to various topics, and a couple of years ago we embarked on an ESG project to add ESG factors into our processes, and we've increased our content, for typically, for some areas between 30 and 90% just around this topic. And whether it's just because it's in vogue and people are talking about it a lot, but the net there's a lot of assets now managed to kind of ESG mandates. The increase in AUMs for ESG type products has mushroomed hugely, particularly in Europe. And then from that, there's been a lot of scandals around sort of greenwashing, people sort of window dressing their activity, and that is giving huge opportunities to people to dive into that. And then there's regulation coming, and there's talk around kind of not just a particular entity's ESG footprint, but their supply chain, so they're downstream suppliers. So it's an area where people are really looking to dive into it in a lot of detail, and our data is providing some really good insights around that.
So, okay, very interesting. So for the first two panelists, I hear fixed income and obviously ESG is important. Rio, when the type of customers that you're working with in building these data platforms, are you seeing, what are you seeing? Is it also fixed income, maybe some ESG, or what are the characteristics of the companies that you're working with? Obviously,
Yeah, so,
CME Group is pretty
yeah.
broad based. That could cover everything, but tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, we have broad spectrum of asset classes coverage, from equities to fixed income to interest rate and et cetera. But also I think the question was what asset classes are fastest growing, and if you kind of agree to this idea that crypto is a new asset class, we are seeing quite a lot of kind of inquiries from crypto companies on basically that area is quite hot on, and it's also a bit of a wild west, right? Like it's a lot of these tools and analytics that have built in the equities world, in the FX world, could also be applied to this as well. And so people are looking to kind of exercise more rigor in sort of risk management tools in the first instance, and looking at something like Beacon to kind of help them achieve that goal.
Yeah, I would think that would be a huge area as it becomes less Wild West and more institutionalized, as evidenced by all the big banks wanting to participate, and the ETFs just being announced only a couple of days ago. That's had a huge impact, obviously, on the crypto world, and its sort of quest to become more accepted, more institutional. And obviously that's driving the price spectacularly, which is fantastic, highest that Bitcoin has ever been, and that'll bring up all of the altcoins. So very interesting part. There's a few other questions. One that just came in, which is interesting, something we all have to be concerned about, and that is pricing. For each, what is your number one challenge to convince prospective buyers to purchase your offering? As a follow-up, or a part two, how do you overcome this obstacle and then price your offering to bring in new customers? So here's a how do you price this? Obviously, one of the original things that was discussed in the keynote was the issue of you no longer have to be a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund in order to afford a data infrastructure. You do it for people, but that obviously comes for a price. So how do you talk to us about pricing? Rio, do you want to start with that one, or
there's two aspects to this, right? So there's the pricing, but also there's the value proposition that we provide, right? So if you think of the fintech space through the lens of the innovator's dilemma, like the IT departments of the FinServs can be thought of as the incumbents in a way. And these fintech companies delivering services via the cloud directly to the business user might render these IT departments redundant, right? And so we've seen sort of cases where the IT departments would push back because they feel threatened by these fintechs. Then there's those technology groups that embrace the fintechs and then work with us to provide customers, the end customers, their business value. And so that's one aspect. So the challenges to kind of getting into these organizations. And on the second bit, the pricing, right? Like, so we're always kind of looking to reduce our pricing to make this available for most companies. And we kind of leverage things like open source technology wherever we can to bring down that cost footprint. So yeah.
Okay, all right, that's good. So that basically ends our section on the panel and our panel questions. We do want to, well, okay, let's before we do that, let me ask the same question in our other panelists. Toby, do you want to take that one as well, the pricing question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our pricing model is quite simple. It's kind of a user-based model, and there's different tiering for different numbers of users. And you're looking to try and your value point to be sensible with the client, so you have a long-term relationship with the client. As our data sets have increased, the coverage has increased, you know, you can kind of adopt a kind of a modular approach. You know, and I think from our perspective, the use of our data is quite broad. I mean, it's not only used for people to take the data and look to trade to make money. It's also used to help processes and just basically save time. I mean, our data is delivered in a way that allows people to reduce their workflow times dramatically. So you're just looking to have that kind of value proposition so that it makes sense for the customer and for the business. You know, within the sales process, you know, you can be up against teams where you're, you know, effectively potentially taking away their job, or they think that's what's happening. But I think it's, you know, it's all about understanding within the organization what their use case is, and then trying to, you know, position the product accordingly. But there's definitely an appetite. I mean, I think that it's you know, the kind of whole buy or build type approach in this space for a lot of organizations makes a lot of sense. I mean, doing the kind of analysis and collecting the amount of data we do and the process we put in place is a very expensive undertaking. So we find that definitely we can put forward our value to our customers.
Yeah, it's a very good value proposition. Kesser, have you encountered challenges in pricing? I mean, you're basically you know, you've been doing this quite recently, but you have a great concept. And how have you figured out the pricing for this?
Look, I mean, I think we're in a good spot where the value proposition is just so straightforward that honestly it becomes it's not a very complex discussion around price. You know, I think I mentioned earlier, most of the people who have internal solutions, they spend $2 internally on the resources for every $1 that they're actually spending on data. We come in at about 15 to 20 cents for every dollar that you're spending on data. So we actually come in at about a 1/10 of the cost of an in-house solution, but we deliver a product that is 5 to 10x better in terms of speed, scalability, accuracy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, to be honest, it generally has been a very, very smooth process for us.
Okay, fantastic. Good. Well, thank you, panelists, for that insightful discussion. Let's move on to the Q&A session, which is the third and final session of our webinar. And here is where we're going to hear from the audience. So we've already gotten quite a few questions, and we're going to pick off these questions and ask them to each one of the panel members. So if you are interested in asking a question, please do so now as we go into our Q&A session. And our first question here is, could you share what you are seeing on the pace of adoption for your platforms by smaller asset and investment manager, say those with less than $5 billion in AUM? And that harkens back to the keynote where we talked about the large firms being able to afford it. The small firms really need a data platform. Tell us about the adoption rate there. Rio, could you start with that?
I could say that there is interest now. Beacon still isn't the price level isn't the place where the smaller managers could sort of decide on a day. But we're looking to scale our product to make it a repeatable sales process on our side. So we're kind of working towards that as well.
Okay, yeah, you're mostly hitting up the larger corporate entities that are trying to create a new component. I get that. And Kesser, are you? But your primary, we're looking at smaller asset managers as for your solution, aren't you?
Well, I think we run the gamut. So we have some of the world's biggest hedge funds on our platform, and we have some new emerging small funds on our platform too. And it's really interesting. I mean, we had one client join recently. It was a portfolio manager who used to run a book at one of the larger platforms, and he was used to having a 35-person central data team servicing his every need. And when he launched his own platform, obviously he didn't have that. He couldn't afford it. And then he saw our platform, and literally we showed him the platform at 2 o'clock. And by 10 p.m. that night, we had a signed contract. The next day he was up and running. And he said to us, I hope you don't sell this to my old employer, because I want you to arm the Rebel Alliance versus the Death Star. And so I think that there's a view among some of these smaller guys that they've been left out because of the massive upfront investment that's required in technology. And I think to a large extent, we're helping not just level that playing field, we're actually giving them an advantage over their old larger employers.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. I like the Death Star analogy. Once again, your analogies are fantastic. Toby, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the under $5 billion market.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we're quite a small sales team, so you tend to focus on the bigger clients initially. So we've got a pretty good book of business across some of the larger managers, and one of the areas we're particularly strong is in the Muni market, and we've seen some good interest from some smaller players fairly recently. We've actually had some really good response over the last 6 months or so around the launch of our ESG data set. So we're actively in discussion with a number of different organizations, and there's a proof of concept process going on with quite a few. So we're hoping to grow that book of business. I mean, to be frank, we're pretty agnostic about the size of businesses in terms of the alpha generation sector that we work with. It's just a case of working through their processes to validate the value of the data. So very keen to talk to more if there's anyone listening.
Yeah. Have you thought about charging customers based on, usage, pay by the drip at the point of use, for instance?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, we've kind of review and explore different commercial models quite frequently. I mean, at the moment we're essentially a user-based approach, and there's some scaling on the size of those user bases and size of the businesses. But as the data gets deeper, I mean, I think we're seeing some particular interest in analysis around some of the smaller businesses, private companies, areas where it's difficult to find standard data. So we certainly would entertain ideas around that if a client felt there was an opportunity.
Yeah, Kesser, what about you? Are you looking at consumption-based usage?
We're not. So when we typically price a deal, it's based on sort of the initial size of the firm and what they're consuming on day one. But after that, we sort of just we keep the price consistent. We don't change it because we actually want to encourage people to use more data, and we don't want them to feel like every time they start consuming more that there's a meter running and then they have to come back and pay us more. Because I think we're trying to play the long game here. We think the more we help catalyze and accelerate the adoption of data in general, I think that it's a win-win-win for everybody in the ecosystem.
So, how does your platform differ from FactSet, Icon, or Bloomberg, all of which provide access to proprietary alternative databases? Could you give us a sort of a feel for that?
I can go first.
Sure.
So I guess a good analogy is maybe when the iPhone came out in 2007. Initially it was a closed ecosystem of apps, and the use of the App Store didn't explode until they opened it up to third-party apps. And I think that is sort of a good analogy for what you might see on a traditional platform versus what you see with us. We are agnostic to what data you consume. We don't dictate, okay, this is the data that we own or that we have preferential partnerships with, and therefore that's all you can use. We say, tell us whatever data you have. Chances are 90% of it is already on our platform, and if it's not, we'll help bring it onto our platform. We don't charge the data vendors anything for that. And so we have a very clean business model with no conflicts of interest. And we want to truly create that sort of third-party app store where you can come in and, whatever you want to be using, you should be able to use.
Right. I mean, if I were to ask the same question to you, Toby, obviously you're not relying on any established data providers or what FactSet, Icon, or Bloomberg have to offer. You basically go out and you do your own sourcing of data, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So that's interesting.
So on the flip side, we would look to be open to putting our data on their platforms, on other platforms, if that was an easier way for distribution and access for the clients. I think there would be a kind of two-way street on these things.
Yeah. What about is Bitvor experiencing adoption and use cases of your unstructured alternative additive data within the seemingly relentless growth of the ETF market?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think that the ETF market is, it's really starting to morph into more interesting strategies. So as you probably know, that the bulk of ETF assets are based against a pretty static index. And the index would be, say, market cap index or a valuation-based index. But as the ETF providers are looked to produce more different types of products, they're starting to add different data points into those products. So, for example, there's a big proliferation of ESG type ETFs, and our data could potentially be used to power some of the analysis to create those ETFs. And then fairly recently, there's been the emergence of the active ETF, where the SEC has allowed certain types of ETFs to exist where there's a bit of a delay on the portfolio disclosure, but it's not tracking an index, it's tracking a kind of a strategy. So the use of alternative data in those strategies, I think will grow hugely. And then there's a big kind of movement to convert, traditional mutual funds, traditional alternative strategy funds into ETFs. So I think the whole ETF space is doing really well because ETFs are an easy way to transact, but the underlying strategies around those ETFs is a huge opportunity for the alternative data space.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, never would have thought of that. Rio, do you have any advice for asset managers looking to use data platforms as a competitive advantage?
I'd say to apply the same investing principles and rigor that you would apply when making decisions on your portfolio. Instead of looking at your technology spend as a cost, think of it as an investment that you're trying to scale with your portfolio. So you got to be ultra precise in what you're trying to achieve for the tech investment that you're making and define specific success criteria for it.
All right, good. Yeah, I hear you. Here's an interesting question that just popped up. Some would say that cloud infrastructure adoption across enterprises has been slower than anticipated. The cloud is highly complex and the underlying pace of innovation is rapid. How do you articulate the benefits of cloud adoption to non-technical key decision makers that you speak with? Kesser, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the heart of our value proposition is just cut out all that complexity. And, this was a solution that was built by me as a user. I wasn't a technical person. I wasn't an engineer, but, I wanted to consume data. I wanted to be intelligent about the companies that I invested in. And I just wanted answers. And so everything that we built was from the perspective of what is a buy-sider sitting in my seat who's got, who's putting out fires all day long, who's receiving 1,000 emails a day from the sell side and, from his partners, etc. What does he want to see where he can get information out of the data and just get on with their day job? And so I think to a large extent, that's what we've at least tried to do with our solutions, is cut out all that complexity and just put the answers and the solutions and the insights in front of people.
Yeah, on the cloud. Rio, do you want to take that one? Because the cloud infrastructure is really at the heart of what you're doing over at Beacon. Do you want to handle that?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of these companies that we speak with already have a cloud strategy in place. And, so it's not so difficult to articulate the benefits of the cloud adoption per se, but now they're kind of faced with this problem of where to begin, right? So Beacon comes in and kind of helps with these cloud, migration strategy for them, and so that's been a really a big selling point for us.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Let me get back to Kesser. Obviously, through your example of that client, you can get up and running on your platform quite rapidly. I mean, inside of 24 hours, that's fantastic. But is that one of the things that you learned since you've been in the market of providing data, or are there other things that you've learned?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the lessons. People want to get up to speed quickly. They don't want to spend weeks and months learning a new tool. I think we've also learned that there's actually a genuine thirst for a solution like this in the marketplace. I mean, we've got already all the major data vendors, alternative data vendors are on our platform, each and every one almost. Some of the largest and most sophisticated buyers of data on our platform. So I think, that's a testament to the fact that we're just a 4-month-old company and we had this level of success. I think at least it suggests that there's a thirst for a solution like this. The second thing that I learned is that generally asset managers want to consume more data. And I can't really emphasize this enough. We consistently see folks who come onto the platform, with just 2 or 3 data sources, and within a week or two, they're adding a 3rd, 4th, 5th data set to their entitlements. And I think because we just, make onboarding easy, we show them the benefits of blending multiple data sources together to actually improve the signal accuracy. And then we build, super refined screening tools and alerts that make it easy for investors to just stay on top of a growing pile of data without getting overwhelmed. So I would probably say those are some of the key lessons that we've so far seen in the brief amount of time we've been out there.
Yeah, that's good. Nobody's happy with just a couple of data sets. It always seems to mushroom. That's fantastic, and it's probably why the data world is growing exponentially, and all these great predictions are out there for incredible growth. But what I'd like to do now is move to our final item, which is the lightning round. And we all know that at the beginning of the establishment of the New York Stock Exchange, and the equities that were traded on the New York Stock Exchange were a finite number, but that continues to grow. And what's growing even faster is the creation of these ETFs through different equity combinations. You have actually more ETFs now, stocks themselves. And sort of laying that parallel onto the data platform world. And here's the lightning round question for everybody. Please keep your answers to 1 sentence or less. How many years will it take for the number of data platforms to exceed the number of individual data providers, if at all? Rio, do you want to start with that?
2 years.
2 years, okay. Toby.
Difficult question. I'm not sure that will happen. I don't think that will happen, actually.
Okay, fair enough. Kesser?
Yeah, I agree with Toby. I think platforms by definition are geared towards more of a centralized, consolidated marketplace. You see that in the search engine, you see that in app stores, you see that in social media platforms. I think you'll go through a period where you see a proliferation, and at some point you're going to have to see consolidation, because that's what the buyers and sellers of the platform want to see.
Gotcha. All right. So a consolidation, not so there will not be more data platforms than the data providers themselves. Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you all for that question, and that just about wraps things up. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Beacon Platform, the CME Group, Bitvor, Maiden Century, and RepRisk. And special thanks to our partner, CAIA. And of course, thank you to the speakers today, all of whom did a fantastic job. And thank you to you all. A recording will be made available in the next couple of days. We look forward to connecting back with you at our next BattleBlitz webinar next month on ESG reality. All the best, and bye-bye.